Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Michael Jacobson, the director of the Vera Institute of Justice. It's my pleasure to welcome you here tonight to the Schomberg Center for Research and Black Studies for the Charles B. Rangel Justice Address. The first in what we expect will be an annual series of major addresses on the subject of social and criminal justice. Most of you are familiar with Vera, but for those of you who aren't, I want to take a moment to put the evening in context. Let me begin by drawing your attention to the Vera name you see behind me. Tonight marks the unveiling of a new public image for Vera, one that is consistent with our forward-looking agenda, which we hope will make us more recognizable and accessible to the partners and communities that we serve. For the past 46 years, the independent nonprofit Vera Institute of Justice has partnered with government agencies, originally in New York City, but more recently across the nation and around the world, to improve the systems that people rely on for safety and justice, whether that means conducting research on the effectiveness of community policing, creating alternatives to incarceration to help keep kids out of detention centers that can undermine their future, or informing policymakers about fairer and more efficient ways of the handling of asylum petitions of people who have fled other nations. The central theme throughout all our work, and its scope is far wider than the few examples I just cited, is a quest for greater justice for all people. Given this focus, it is not surprising that much of Vera's work intersects with the criminal justice system, which aspires to administer justice consistently, but so often falls short of its goal. Nowhere in our nation are the shortcomings of this system more apparent than in our massive overuse of incarceration and the overrepresentation of minorities in every part of this country's criminal justice system. The simple truth is that we cannot talk about reforming criminal justice in America without also talking about issues of race, justice, equity, and public safety. Even with an ever-expanding correctional system, one that costs this country over $60 billion annually, blacks are still 6 times more likely than whites to be the victims of homicide. There are countless ways to assess this state of affairs. One that I find especially poignant is the statistic that nearly 1 out of 3 African American boys born today is likely to spend time in prison during his lifetime. Nearly 1 in 3. More than 2 million people are incarcerated in the United States today, and people of color are a majority of them. Proportionally, there are roughly 8 times as many blacks in state and federal prison as there are whites. Even if we could reduce the overall size of the prison population, and there are many compelling arguments why we should, were the overrepresentation of minorities to remain unchanged, we would still be faced with a serious moral crisis. America has yet to adequately answer the question why so many people of color continue to be incarcerated and continue to be victims of crime at rates that far exceed their representation in society. America has yet to come to terms with this crisis in large part because ignorance and prejudice allow many people to be comfortable with the status quo. For more than 4 decades, Vera has worked to bring rational thought, credible research, informed decision-making to correct problems like this. But we have been far from alone in such endeavors. Tonight's honorees, to name 2 prominent examples, have been at the forefront of efforts to secure equal justice for Americans. Back in the early 1960s, when Vera was just starting out, our keynote speaker, Nicholas de Beers Katzenbach, was already a central figure in promoting integration and advancing civil rights as an official in the U.S. Justice Department under President Kennedy and as Attorney General under President Johnson. At about the same time, our special honoree, after whom this justice address is named, Charles Rangel, a Korean War veteran and newly minted lawyer, homegrown in Harlem, was about to embark on a historic career in public service. First as a federal prosecutor, then in the New York State Assembly, and finally since 1971 as a member of Congress, where he serves as chairman of the House Committee on Ways and Means. Over the decades, Congressman Rangel has been a consistent advocate for the disadvantaged and dispossessed, both in Harlem and around the nation. He was, for example, a guiding force behind the development of federal empowerment zones designed to revitalize urban neighborhoods throughout the United States. He authored the low-income housing tax credit to spur the development of affordable housing and championed the work opportunity tax credit to provide employment opportunities for young people, veterans, and ex-offenders. As chairman of the Congressional Narcotics Abuse and Control Caucus, he continues to focus congressional attention on the continuing problem of substance abuse in America. And finally, Congressman Rangel has been a special friend of Vera. both as an enthusiast of Vera's national work on sentencing and corrections reform, and in his longtime support for the Neighborhood Defender Service, an independent nonprofit here in Harlem that is internationally recognized as innovator in public defense practice and which began as a Vera project to provide community-based defense services. By providing an opportunity to hear both these men reflect on their work for justice and fairness, tonight is an occasion to look back upon struggles and accomplishments of the past. But it is also an opportunity to assess how history informs the present and prepares us all for the future. There is much we can learn from the example, the intelligence, and perseverance of public servants like Charles Rangel and Nick Katzenbach. It is my pleasure now to introduce you to Congressman Charles Rangel and to present him with this token of our gratitude and respect to mark the occasion of the Charles B. Rangel Justice. Congressman. Never got one of these before, have you?
No.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nick, I didn't know that I was sharing this great occasion with you, but I welcome the award. And I welcome all of you for taking time out to thank Nick for the great contributions that he's made to our country, and therefore, in my opinion, the world. It is no great secret that whenever I'm asked as to what president I admired and respected the most, it was when Lyndon Johnson said that we would overcome, that I knew that he was prepared to do the moral thing at a great political disadvantage. And when Nick was there to put together a framework that went beyond the Constitution to allow all people of all colors to participate in this great republic, history has to record you as one of the greatest attorney generals we've ever had, and we thank you for that. It was after I was an assistant U.S. attorney and got involved politically that a person named Percy Sutton, my friend and advisor, told me that a march was taking place from Selma to Montgomery, and that it would be good if I marched with Dr. King and Ralph Bunche and John Lewis and Andrew Young. And I made it clear that I wasn't thinking about marching 54 miles with my bad feet for anybody. But if they thought it was appropriate, I would go down and have my picture taken and return home. And that I did. I went down, I had my round-trip ticket, I took my pictures, it started to rain, and these old folks went into their bags and pulled out the plastic and started to wrap it around their worn, torn shoes and started to march. A guilty conscience said to me, well, go a couple of blocks and then get a cab and get on back to LaGuardia. What I didn't know was there weren't no couple of blocks in Selma, and there weren't no cabs. And once I started marching, I was marching into the darkness. And I cussed every step of those 54 miles and wondering, how did I get caught up in this? I tell that story because every day in our lives and in your lives, we're making history and we didn't know it. I had no idea of the power of Dr. King, of the power of those old black folks and white folks that had taken the time off. And I had no idea that the Voting Rights Act that this man wrote would provide a path for 13 African Americans to serve in the Congressional Black Caucus. I had no idea that as a result of the Voting Rights Act, that in 10 years that 13 would double and become 26. And today, as a result directly to the legislation and the Voting Rights Act, we have 43 African Americans serving in the House of Representatives and the Senate, and 23 Latinos serving in the House as a result of that Voting Rights Act. God will bless you for what you've done for your country. But what makes the privilege of introducing our guest speaker so exciting? It's because it's being sponsored by Vera. Vera represents to me what America is all about. How do you help somebody that needs help? How do you give them the self-esteem? How do you give them the protection? How do you allow them to believe in this country when they talk about America that you're talking about them? And now more than ever, Nick, we need the concepts of Vera and the things that you have done. Because people are trying to give me a different America. An America that violates sovereignty of other countries for oil and allow tens of thousands of people to die for reasons that don't exist. An America that tortures people. That's not my America. An America that can pick human beings off the street and take them to foreign countries and incarcerate them, even in the island of Cuba, where you and I can walk the streets and just be picked up and disappear. Things that we thought used to happen in South America are happening by my country. I could walk the streets of any country in the world and know, no matter what they said about there was a sense of pride of being an American. And now we find that our new Attorney General has no idea where he is or why he is there. We find a president that it even hurts as a Democrat to see his ability to have the favor of the people is below 30%. And a vice president, if you want to go there, that's at 18%. There's a limitation on how much enjoyment you can get as a Democrat. This hurts as an American. But Vera constantly keeps what America is supposed to be alive. And I will take that initiative with me to Washington, D.C., where I chair a committee that's responsible for individual and corporate tax, responsible for trade, responsible for Social Security, responsible for Medicare, but most of all responsible for our national security. And my very first hearing was a statement to this country and the world that poverty and ignorance in this country is a threat to our national security. This country cannot afford to ignore the health and education of the poorest among us. And it's not just a question of what is the cause of violence, of unwanted children, of crime and drugs and jail. It's a question if we're going to be involved in globalization. The strength of America is not going to come from our corporate structure. It's going to come from our people who are strong, competitive, and productive. And the Ways and Means Committee may not look like a social justice program, but I refuse to allow the stigma of Katrina to represent what my country should be representing. And so, Vera, you may not believe that the Ways and Means Committee can be an extension of your work, but you cannot love this country unless you want to make certain that every American has access to making this country as great as she can be. And believe me, if we fail in that, we can bark at the moon with China all we want. But 1 billion people bent on health and education is a big thing for us if all we have are millions of people locked up and other hopeless and homeless and in our street. And so, Nick, I've never got a chance to thank you for the thousands of Black and Latino people who, in this country, had to meet the challenges of bombings and dogs. I've never thanked you for the comfort that you've gave and the courage that you gave to Lyndon Johnson, who knew we would lose the South once African Americans had the opportunity to vote. And it's strange how history comes around, because in all of the marching and complaining, I had no idea that history was being made. Nicholas, we need you now more than ever, because a handful of hoodlums in Washington is not going to take my country away. And they can have surges, and they can have fights, and they can challenge our patriotism. But America will be leaving Iraq, and friends of America will be coming back, and once again we will be so proud, not because we made a mistake, but because we corrected it. And so, Nicholas, as I invite you to come up, I'm reminded that we've made full circle. Full circle at a country that was based on slavery and had a guy like Nick Katzenbach to advise President Johnson to say, enough is enough. Treat these people with all of the dignity that you would want to be treated. And that's why we have the Voting Rights Act. And now, even with that, they steal the elections from us. So, Nicholas, come up and tell us what you are planning for us next, because we needed you before, and God knows we need you now. Nicholas Katzenbach, the author of the Voting Rights Act that opened the doors to give opportunities to people, a confidant of Jack Kennedy, the Attorney General of Lyndon Johnson, and I'm in the Congress as a senior member of the Black Caucus because of this man.